Okay. I should be live now, but people can say in the chat if they can see me, and then I will know for sure that I'm live. Let me go like this. Go like this. Open this up. Let's mute. Make sure we're muted. Let's see if I see. I don't see anything here yet. Let's see if I can go. Okay, I know my topics, and that should be good now. Okay, cool. People can see me and hear me. Welcome back to TAKT with RMTransit, my new streaming series that I've been doing for the last 2 weeks, and that I hope to continue for at least 2 more weeks. I hope to do this fairly long term. The next stream is linked in the video description / stream description, so if you're interested in following along with future live streams, you can click the link there. You can also, of course, watch these live streams after they've happened. I know I personally listen to a lot of live streams, just sort of like a podcast. You don't really need the visuals. I aspire to someday have a ton of maps and stuff that I can show people, but the reality is that I probably never will do that because it's just more involved than I want to get with something like a live stream. I'll give it probably a minute or two before I start talking about the main topics that I've specified for this episode, which are also in the description. Lots of stuff in the description. But yeah, I really appreciate everyone coming out. And I guess I just realized I can't see how many people are concurrently watching. So I probably should rectify that by going in here. Let's duplicate. Let's go. This is not the ideal way of doing this. See, that's not ideal as well. YouTube remains frustrating. If I click go live, I'll see this. There we go. Now I can actually see what's happening. This might be the best way to monitor things, actually. As I mentioned in my last live stream, I have a bit of a different computer setup now. I think I prefer doing things this way. Let's see. So yeah, I'm gonna give it 3 minutes until 6:05, so I can start talking about the various topics today, which include accessibility on transit, because I've been going around with the stroller and I have a lot of thoughts. Urban rail in Africa, which I'm actually going to leave to the end because I feel like it's the kind of main topic. And then high-speed rail in Canada, because I think that's an interesting topic to talk about as well. Next time, again, the link to the next stream is in the description. I'm going to be talking about master plans, which I think is kind of an interesting topic. So lots of fun things coming up. I also have some announcements to make, which I'll make at 6:05. And I would also like to point people to my blogs. So I have both a blog that's about Toronto called Next Toronto, where I talk about not just transit, a lot of transit, but not just transit, and other issues that are relevant to Toronto and making it a great city. You know, a city that doesn't feel like it's a couple tiers below London or Tokyo. And so that's one topic. And then another blog I have is called 5%, which is about self-improvement and kind of my journey and things I've been thinking about and doing to be healthier or smarter, live a better life, etc. So yeah, I'm just going to go through the chat until 6:05, and then I'm going to get on with the announcements, of which there are 2, and the main topics of the chat. Lots of people saying hi, which is good to know that everything is working. Where's all your transit memorabilia? Well, I have over here, I think I need to look at OBS. I have a REM map on the wall, and that's most of my transit memorabilia. I also have a CP rail thing here, which I think is pretty cool. That was gifted to me by a friend, And that's about all the transit memorabilia I have around now. As sad as it is. So yeah, I probably should do something. I have like a couple bins full of transit maps and transit cards and other transit related stuff. Like my Lego crocodile somewhere. It was a pretty small place, and I've honestly tried to. I kind of talk about this on my blog 5%. I've tried to minimize the amount of stuff I own, and memorabilia is kind of like the lowest hanging fruit for getting rid of stuff, and so a lot of it has gone. Not all of it, but a lot of it. Especially since I'm not recording typical transit videos anymore, the justification for having it around is weaker, which makes me sad. I'm gonna talk talk a bit about my cynicism and the way I've been feeling about transit and Toronto at some point in this stream as well. But it's 6:05, so I'm just gonna see if there's anything else interesting in the chat, and I'm gonna hop over to our various topics after I do some announcements. Someone said, love your Globe and Mail piece. Yeah, I actually wrote a piece in the Globe and Mail with a guy named Willem, who's a good friend, about why investing in public transit is a good response to the trade war the U.S. has kind of started against Canada and much of the world. And so that's probably a worthwhile read. I linked it in one of my channel posts. Yeah, so I think that's it there. I have two announcements to make. One is that I am going to have a video up on the channel next Friday. This is kind of my plan for the future. If I release stuff, it's going to be on Fridays. I'll stream on Fridays, release videos on Fridays, etc. As you know, I'm not really releasing videos anymore. The point of this video, let me step back. There are, I guess now, like 5 videos that may happen on the channel. 3 of those videos are Beijing subway explained. If someone's interested in collaborating on that, or lives in Beijing, or knows someone who does, reach out to me. I do want to do an explainer. The Beijing subway is now the largest rapid transit system in the world, and it feels like it justifies video, especially because it's kind of even harder to wrap your head around than some other systems, like even Tokyo, because Google Maps is not great in China. So there's that. There's the Moscow Metro, which at this point, yeah, I'm going to cover it. I didn't want to, cover it for the last few years. I'm going to cover it because it is a famous and very important system, very influential. And then Chinese high-speed rail, I feel like it deserves a proper explainer to kind of end things off. Then the 2 other videos I need to do are one, which is going to, actually 2, which are just going to announce different things that I'm going to tell you about now because I'm really thankful that you come to these live streams. So the first of those projects is something I'm working on with other YouTubers. Something I really appreciate about Not Just Bikes is that when he reached 100,000 subscribers, he made a video that was almost entirely about other people, not about himself, which is more than you can say for most people on YouTube, including me. And I thought it would be really nice if I could sort of end off my channel, with the keeping in mind that there might be a couple more videos, but, as it rides off into the sunset, make videos about other YouTube channels. I thought that would be a cool idea. And so what I did was I reached out to a bunch of YouTubers who I enjoy and who I think make good videos about public transit, but perhaps city stuff too. I haven't really talked to any city-specific people, but I guess that's possible in the future. And I basically said to them, what if you made a video that goes on my channel that's like a trailer or like a promotion of your channel, so that, the large number of subscribers I have don't just kind of not have anything to watch anymore. I enjoy these people's videos, and so I kind of imagine that if I enjoy it, my viewers will enjoy it. And so I'm going to have probably at least 3 or 4, but maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 videos from other transit related YouTubers that are kind of like short videos from them doing the kinds of things they typically do on their own channels, but on my channel, so that it can promote them and spread the word about them to more people. I thought this was kind of a good idea because I do have a large number of subscribers given the niche I'm in, which is not really trains. It's more like transportation planning, I would say. I don't really have like a lot of rail fanny type videos. I have some, but I don't even allow you to hear every single squeak from the train. So how much of a rail fan am I? But with the large number of subscribers from all over the world, it sort of makes sense, in my opinion, to not just let that evaporate, to actually try to connect people with other interested people that are making YouTube videos. I have a huge back catalog, which I recommend people go watch, because I think very few people have watched all of my videos, much less all of the good ones, of which I think there are many. And so I thought, give people some more content from other creators, and some creators that are, at a different stage in their YouTube journey. Give them some new viewers and help create something positive for the future, so that my channel doesn't burn out and all of these people kind of disperse, and there's not like a transit YouTube thing, which I think would be sad, because it's cool that urban planning and transit have kind of created a scene. I won't be promoting people whose videos include attacks on me. Someone is asking in the chat. As much as I feel like that would be another level of kindness. Sort of feel like that's more than is really required of me. But some classic transit YouTubers will have videos. At least one video has already basically been made, and I've watched it. It's very entertaining, and it's from a YouTuber who does kind of crazy transit challenges. But the cool thing is that a bunch of the YouTubers who I've found via the algorithm and via people reaching out to me, they're not like widely known or whatever. And so I was mentioning some of these people to other people who were going to make videos, and they're like, I don't know who that is. And I thought, oh my goodness, because I really like this person's videos. So this is actually a very exciting idea. And and I think that's very, very good, very promising. And so I hope to do minimum like 5 videos like that. It's not really me doing the videos. I'm just trying to promote them or help them happen. There's a word I'm looking for that escapes me. That word. Enable. It's not enabling. Making it happen. But I think that would be a good idea. And then hopefully when I do it, a few other people reach out to me, and then I can, it can be this long tail thing where a few big people who I reached out to, big being relative, because if you have as many subscribers as me, there's not really a point, but some larger YouTubers can happen, and then it can be like a long tail where like other people reach out to me, and I'm like, oh yeah, your channel is cool. You can put a video up on my channel, which I think would be a good idea to just help spawn more transit-related content, even if I'm not making that content myself. So that's the first announcement. So that's coming. Next week will be a video where I kind of announce that on the channel, and then the week after will be a stream, and then the week after that will be the first one of these videos, and I hope that there's a lot of these videos. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I am working on another project, which is a book. It's not with a publisher or anything, though if you are a publisher or know a publisher, maybe we can chat. I'm not really prescriptive about these things. The only reason I would work with a publisher is, I guess, because I think it would be cool and they could help me promote it, I guess, and help distribute it. But I really think that I kind of already have a huge distribution channel, which is this YouTube. And the idea of the book is sort of like taking all of the lessons that I try to teach in my YouTube videos, and putting that out in book format, so that it's easier to sort of index and to get at the information, right? Someone is using the word curate. Curate is a very good word, and I like that word in this case, but it's not curate. It's more along the lines of enable. Facilitate. There. Famous. There you go. Famey got it. The idea of this book is to sort of, and it is a big project. It's a project which I've started like 3 or 4 times now, and it's died pretty early on each time. I think largely because in the past I was working on other transit-related writing, and so it's a lot harder when you've spent your whole day writing about transit to go and write more about transit. But I think now that I'm not really doing that, it should be easier to do the book and sort of sit down and power through it. So like today, I started again, but I'm pretty confident this time it's actually going to happen. And I wrote like 5,000 words over a couple hours. And so, and I think I have a bit more of a leaner plan for what the book would look like, that I can build on. Because I think the way I would do it is sort of with additions, sort of like, textbooks are sometimes, there's a lot of editions where you sort of expand over time. I think I may do something similar where I start with less detail and I kind of add additional sections and more detail based on things people tell me about the book, or things that they think I should add, or things that they think I should clarify. Sort of in the way that a video works. But again, I think the most powerful thing about having this in book form, beyond, for me, honestly, allowing it to be a nice project to end things on, honestly, I'm not sure I'm going to be involved in transit stuff in a serious way, besides, like, I shouldn't say serious, in a career-based way, for the foreseeable future. Like, once I'm done this book, I think that's kind of it, besides maybe expanding the book over time. Like, hopefully participate in activism and stuff, but I'm not going to be making videos and doing all that stuff. But the idea is to kind of create a very strong body of work that I can just say, I wrote a book, and it's a very long book, and it provides a ton of information, and it's just a good book that hopefully transit people all over, like, you should read this book, because you're just going to learn a lot of things, and it's going to give you a lot of ideas about transit. And so that's kind of my thinking on the book issue. And it's motivated in part by the fact that, even I know the topics I've covered in my videos. But if I want to tell someone something, or suggest they watch something, it's sometimes a bit hard to find a particular lesson or whatever, because because of YouTube, you have to do certain thumbnails and titles, and sometimes the titles and thumbnails don't necessarily make all of the lessons that I'm trying to teach obvious. And so by having it in a book format, it's kind of more like, okay, this is the section about monorails and like things you should know about that. And it's a bit clearer, it's a bit easier to find the topic you're looking for. And so as a reference, it's just, I think, maybe more useful in some ways than videos. Videos are probably more engaging, etc. But as a resource that you kind of refer back to regularly, I think a book is really valuable. Plus, unlike with videos, I think it's a little easier to say, I'm going to read this whole book and feel like you've absorbed a lot of knowledge. Whereas, I know from personal experience, when I've tried to go and watch an entire YouTube channel's videos, sometimes you're like, do I really need to watch this video? And maybe you do, because there's information that's relevant to a topic that isn't the main topic of the video, but it's halfway through. And the benefit of a book is that it's structured in a more logical way. And so that's my thinking on that. It's going to be an ongoing project. I would say I'd love it for it to be done before the end of the year, so that my YouTube channel still has subscribers who I can actually say, like, hey, I made a thing. Do you want to help support this thing too? But that's kind of the plan there. I think it's going to be fun, and I hope it's really useful to people. And I hope it lets me sort of wrap up, like, I'll be honest, I kind of want to wrap up the transit career thing, and I'd made a lot of videos, etc., but it doesn't feel like I made a final hour-long video that's like this great masterpiece. I was never about creating beautiful videos. It was about sharing knowledge, and so doing a book feels like the kind of way of wrapping it all really nicely. And so that's what I'm thinking, and that's that. So I'm just going to quickly look at the chat, and then I'm going to get into my first topic today, which is accessibility, because I've been thinking about it a lot more since I have a kid, which means I have a stroller that I roll around, and I think it's interesting. So let me see. People like the idea of sharing other YouTubers. You should include non-English channels as well. I mean, I think there are some channels I will include that, where the main person isn't an English speaker, or at least doesn't speak English as their first language. But the reality is that if the YouTube channel doesn't have English subtitles, which means the person is probably an English speaker, then it's unlikely I would promote them, because I wouldn't even know of them, / I wouldn't be able to judge whether their videos are good. There's that guy in Paris who's really good, who has English subtitles on some of his videos. I didn't reach out to him, but I have talked to him before, and I think maybe I would reach out to him. So he's kind of like the Parisian Jeff Marshall, not Tim Traveler. People will know who I'm talking about. Someone says, so Africa is not getting a transit explained, because I'm going to be talking about urban rail in Africa at the end of this video. No, I'm not doing more transit explains outside of the ones I mentioned, just because I don't have the time slash motivation to make them. And there's so many cities I didn't cover outside of Africa as well. Like in I guess I covered quite a few in Latin America, but not. There's lots in Latin America. There's lots in North America I didn't cover. So, um, uh, what happened to Urban Caffeine? Her last video was April 2024. People just kind of move on. Like YouTube is extremely stressful and exhausting, and you don't generally make fantastic money from it, and so people move on from it. It's rarely is it a person's full-time job unless they're really, really big. And so it's sort of like in the way that you have hobbies and sometimes you stop having those hobbies. It's the same thing, right? Someone's saying, just started reading Human Transit. That's a book by Jarrett Walker. It's a really classic public transportation book. It's a great book. What was my biggest takeaway from it? Honestly, without trying to sound arrogant, I feel like I didn't learn a ton from Human Transit, just that like I didn't read it until fairly recently, and I feel like I'm pretty far up the pole of knowledge on transit at this point. But I think what Jarrett does so well is kind of really eloquently talk about topics that can be sensitive, like, should we have more frequency or coverage, which doesn't sound sensitive on the face of it until you're telling someone that you're going to move their bus stop like half a kilometer away or something. And Jarrett has a really good way of talking about these things rationally but sensitively, and I think that's kind of in my opinion, the biggest strength of the book. If you already know about public transit, but I think for a lot of people, the great strength is like telling you why frequency matters, etc. And so I think that's really valuable. Yeah, there's a few great Japanese YouTubers covering transit stuff. Kevin mentions, I was going to post a request on Blue Sky asking for links to women in transit because my followers are too male. Maybe we could use that as a lens when thinking of passing the baton. I'd certainly be interested in women who are making transit YouTube videos, like being able to promote them for sure. So if people have ideas, then I'd love to hear them. You should try to go with a publisher for the book so libraries can more easily carry it. Yeah, I guess that's the benefit of having a publisher. I have not thought about these logistics very much. But at the same time, I feel like the internet is kind of the greatest mode of distribution, even though libraries are obviously great. Did you ever cover Iran? I did not. Iran has the problem that a lot of places have, which is that there's just not a lot of media and information about it online. I'm not saying there isn't any, and there's certainly some things that I'm familiar with. Like, the factoid I often share about Iran is there's a line in Tehran that's like uses double-decker rolling stock with electric locomotives but it's like branded as a metro line. It's an interesting system. It's probably bigger than a lot of people assume. Like it's like a Santiago sized system. Uses a lot of Chinese rolling stock, which makes sense for geopolitical reasons. I definitely think it's an interesting system, but honestly, with all the systems I've covered, I'm not sure how much talking about it would add beyond the just like Tehran has a pretty large metro system. People should probably be aware of that. Let me see. Yeah, Ferrovipath. I don't know. My French pronunciation is going to be just absolutely abhorrent. Yes, I'm going to talk about this. Yes, I do want closure. Nick is saying, we'll definitely get your book. There's one book there. You don't see your next career arcing towards that? I'm not sure what you're saying. Arcing towards what? Arcing towards CS and transit. Okay, immediately made clear. No, not towards CS and transit. I'm going to talk about it at the end of this video, but I have some reasons where I'm kind of like, I want to step back from transit topics. Honestly, sad to hear that you actively want to move past your transit career. You've made important contributions. Much appreciated. I really appreciate that. If there's anything I'm regretful of, and this is, again, feels a bit egotistical or arrogant, it's like, it would be nice if I had more to show for it. I've written in some big publications, which is cool. though they're essentially entirely limited to Canada, so that's less cool given it's like a global thing. It would have been cool to go to like an InnoTrans and get an award for being a YouTube creator or something like that. But that just wasn't in the cards, and you know what? That's okay. I think the achievement ultimately is about reach, and I'm happy to have reached a lot of people. Have you read Gareth Dennis's book? No, but I probably will at some point. I have a lot of books I need to read. Okay. Iran. CDLTO says Iran is the champion of just open the line and open the stations as they're done. So I think that is like where it is useful to know about a different city. Is like sometimes there's different approaches to things like how you open infrastructure, which is different. So con through the chat. I might go back to the chat and sorry, I'm not going to go back to the chat. I'm going to talk about the topics I wanted to talk about. So the first one, this could be brief or it could be a long rambling discussion, is accessibility on transit. I guess, you know, in Toronto, which is where I spend a lot of time, my experience is going to be different from a lot of places. So I'll make some broad statements and then I'll talk about some specifics that I felt using transit with a stroller, which I think you can kind of, you know, not entirely, but somewhat project onto experiences using it with a wheelchair or with a walker or with other things. So this section may not be long, but I've just got strong thoughts. So broadly speaking, systems that aren't trying to be more accessible or aren't working really hard at it, like I'm thinking of Paris, that sucks. Montreal also, you know, has this problem. Honestly, Ontario has a lot of frustrating things about it, but what I will say is Ontario feels like a much more accessible place to me than Quebec. When I'm in Quebec, I'm like, oh my god, it's not very accessible. I remember being, I know this is getting off track a bit, but I think maybe it makes a point. I remember being in a hotel in Montreal that was like brand new, and if it was in Ontario, the bathroom would have a button you can press so that you can open the door, and it would be kind of like larger. The size of the bathroom would be larger, so you could get a wheelchair in there and use everything properly. The thing you'll know about a lot of accessibility features is they're features that everyone benefits from. It's just that some people really need them. And my experience in Montreal with that hotel bathroom was kind of like, oh yeah, like regulations like the AODA in Ontario really have had an impact on making, you know, at the margins, places in Ontario more accessible than in other provinces. Mostly Quebec, since BC seems similarly accessible to Ontario to me. But in Montreal, it's really crazy to me how there isn't a stronger effort to you know, make the system accessible. Much of the metro isn't accessible, and when I've talked to politicians in Montreal about this, and kudos to them because Toronto politicians barely ever talk to me. They've kind of been like, you know, it seems like the STM's attitude is we're not going to sort of violate the architecture of the station when we do the accessibility upgrade. In practice, I think the elevators look maybe slightly nicer in Montreal stations, but generally it feels kind of like Toronto, like it's not great, but ultimately the accessibility matters more than the station being perfectly beautiful, even though, yeah, there's some beautiful stations in Montreal, and it would be sad if that was ruined by, you know, an ugly change in materials where a new addition is built or something. But ultimately, it's just effing unacceptable that Montreal has so little of its system accessible. And I'm saying it about Montreal and being hard on Montreal because Montreal's in Canada. Paris is worse than Montreal because it's otherwise such a good system, and yet the accessibility, especially on the metro, is just so terrible. There's a lot of systems in Europe that have this problem. Honestly, Europe in general, if you want to talk about a weakness in transit systems, the accessibility is a real problem in a lot of places, and it doesn't feel like it's the same priority as it is even in like Toronto, where in Toronto, the entire subway system is going to be accessible in the next few years. Basically, construction for every station that isn't accessible is happening right now. It's just sort of like the matter of waiting a few years for the construction at a few stations that require really significant construction to happen for full accessibility to happen, you know, with elevators, etc. Of course, I think accessibility goes beyond elevators. Elevators are kind of, you know, a big part of step-free access, but there's, having tactile paving so that people who have vision impairment can get around more easily, having platform screen doors so people with vision impairment don't have to be afraid they're going to fall on the tracks, and for all of the other safety benefits. There's a lot of accessibility features that we haven't instituted, and I think for the busy stations in a system, there should be multiple elevator routes, at least multiple elevator routes out of the station, so that you have some built-in redundancy, because you may not experience it if you don't have to use the elevators, but you often hear or see signs about elevators not working. And as I'm going to discuss, that becomes a much bigger problem when you actually need the elevator. So with that out of the way, that kind of broad statement, accessibility is important. Toronto's actually pretty good on this issue. Though I will say things like the streetcars really suck. Low floor buses. It's actually interesting, but I think metro systems are kind of optimal for rolling accessibility, which is what I'll call wheelchair access, stroller access, etc. Because even though buses are in principle accessible in the same way that streetcars are in principle accessible, you feel kind of awkward using it. It's not a great experience because you have to have this ramp deployed, so it requires the bus to wait a lot longer. If it's crowded, what are you supposed to do if you're in a wheelchair and the bus is super crowded? I guess people have to get off, but people get kicked off. How does that work? It's the sort of thing that I imagine even with, say, a stroller. I'm just not going to travel if I feel like I have to inconvenience other people. That's not an option everyone has, but it's this, if it was a metro where there's a lot of capacity, a lot of space, it's not something you'd have to worry about. But with a bus, it is a problem you have to worry about. And so that calls for the need to have paratransit systems that provide people, like a direct ride, etc. The streetcars in Toronto have this problem as well, where they have a ramp, but the ramp sucks, and you're not going to really want to use the ramp. There should just be level boarding to as many platforms as possible. So anyways, I have strong feelings on this issue. But when it comes to using the system, from an accessibility point of view, the biggest thing I've noticed when you have a stroller is oh shit, suddenly the way you use the system is totally different. And it's not because you don't know how to use an elevator or whatever. That's all straightforward. It's just that you go to a station, and this is especially applies to once you're talking about metro systems, which, as I've already pointed out, are kind of like the ideal thing because they have a lot of space, etc. It's kind of straightforward to make them accessible, in the sense that it might be expensive, but you know how to do it, and you know how to make it a pretty good experience. What makes them so complicated is when you use a subway station or a train station of almost any kind, you have this mental model of what the station looks like, of where the entrances are, where you're going to get out. At least if you're a regular commuter and you've used the station before. But the second you need to use the elevators, it becomes totally different. You realize suddenly that, I can't use some of the entrances. Because, especially in systems that retrofitted accessibility, but in systems in general, sometimes entrances aren't accessible. You start realizing you have to look for symbols that are going to tell you that an entrance is okay. Sometimes an elevator only goes to one side of the station. The way you move through the station is totally different. Things that might have felt like they're really spacious before, if you have a wheelchair or a stroller, now they feel a lot less spacious. I don't know. Previously, I guess I thought too, hey, well, if you're an able-bodied person with a stroller, I guess you can carry it upstairs. But the second you have your kid in a stroller, that stops being nearly as attractive. And so I think the main thing I've noticed, and this is just an observation for now, so I'm sure I'll have more observations in the future. I would love platform screen doors because, again, if you have a wheelchair or you're sitting with a stroller, it can just roll, right? And platforms are often slanted towards the tracks so that water runs off. And so you realize, oh my god, all those people who are saying, and I've had this in comments, people saying that platform screen doors don't really matter, or ridiculous things like, I like to see the trains platform screen doors don't matter. Those people don't know what they're talking about, because there are other people for whom this is not just a nice to have, it's a real safety function. You feel unsafe when you're holding a thing that's effectively slippery and it could just slide into the way of the tracks. And so I think it's a very instructive experience, and I'm going to quickly go through the comments because some people had some good comments on this specific topic that I think are worth bringing up. CDLTO has a great point here. I've long thought that transit system executives should be required to navigate the transit system with a disabled person at least once a year. I agree entirely. I think that's a really good idea. People always talk about, or I shouldn't say always, but you'll hear in these circles people say transit executives should ride the system. Obviously they should, but transit executives also should ride the system with someone who requires different accessibility features, so that they can see how it works or how it doesn't work, and how this person's experience is so much worse for lack of things that are often very simple. So I think that's a great idea. The big majority of metro systems are not accessible. That's definitely not true. Most metro systems in the world are very accessible, because the thing is, you might have the view that the majority of metro systems are not accessible if you are like an American or a Brit who lives in London, because a lot of big iconic systems like London, New York, Paris aren't very accessible. But the world has built so many modern systems, and so much has been built in the last few decades. Like, think about China. All of those systems, except for maybe a small number of lines, should be fully wheelchair accessible. And China has like tens of metro systems, right? And everything built, kind of around the world for the last 20 to 30 to 40 years should be accessible. So there's a lot of systems in places like Canada, like Ottawa, Vancouver, that are fully accessible, Calgary, that are fully accessible, just because they were built when that was kind of the standard and things had to be accessible. CDLTO also mentions that Toronto is running buses that are essentially not used by anyone because they didn't meet the legal deadline for the system to be accessible, which is wild because most systems around the world aren't accessible. I think what's being said here is that most systems aren't fully accessible, not that most systems aren't mostly accessible. Do you know if anyone has looked into retrofitting curbs for level boarding for bus routes in Canada for like regular buses? I do not think so. It's a challenging thing. Using ramps makes sense, but you just need, good solutions. CDLTO is saying GO train platforms are 12 cars long, over 300 meters, and the elevator is often at one end of the platform. That's a really long walk for someone with limited mobility. I think that's another very good point. A lot of train stations are pretty difficult to navigate, even putting aside that there's often very long distances involved for someone with mobility impairments, etc. Things like deep stations requiring a lot of elevators to access. Narrow parts of platforms are rough. Yes, definitely. Montreal has 30 that are accessible, but Montreal has 66 stations, I want to say. Of course, the accessibility percentage will go up because the REM is going to be all accessible, but it's still rough. And the thing that's frustrating about it is Montreal actually has pretty simple stations. A lot of them, I don't want to say that they're extremely simple, but a lot of them, it's sort of like elevator to main concourse area and then down to the two platforms, which are side platforms in virtually every case, which does make things harder. It means you need more than if you had island platforms. But they're not actually all that hard. And it seems to me like Montreal needs to do the, I forget what the name of them is, like inclinators, like they have at some stations in London where they travel diagonally. Because I think the last time I was in Montreal, I was kind of going around the metro and thinking like a lot of places in Montreal, you could use an existing stair shaft / escalator shaft and just remove one of the escalators and put an incline elevator, or build a new shaft that was inclined for an elevator right next to the existing shaft. But they, as far as I know, don't have any incline elevators, and so it feels like that's probably part of the solution. But because they're within the Canada can't think out of the box problem, they're not doing that, which might help accelerate things. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be cheap, but this is very important. Someone says, I've heard from engineers that bus level boarding is expensive because it requires utility relocation. I think that's ridiculous because no, it doesn't. You could do level boarding with like a plastic, temporary plastic platform that you just like screw into the sidewalk and then just adjust the height of the road. There's no reason utility relocation should be required for that. And I think the frequent requirement of utility relocation is really just engineers or city politicians trying to use money that should be used for transit to fix infrastructure so that they don't have to, charge higher property taxes, et cetera, et cetera. Someone saying, I wonder if New York subway is possible to be made fully accessible. Virtually any system could be made fully accessible. It's just a matter of money. You can widen platforms. You can buy buildings. You can do all kinds of things. It's just a question of, do you have the will to do it? Dylan is rightly mentioning that a lot of stuff has to do with how the infrastructure is operated, not just what's built. Yeah, you can have elevators that are not functional, or they let you out into a place that isn't easy to access, or you don't have staff to help people. All of these things are good points. So, yeah, the Elizabeth line not having level boarding is crazy, and it's one of the biggest kind of just insane oversights on that system. So the next thing I want to talk about briefly is just kind of the Canadian high-speed rail situation, because I've thought about it a lot more because we've kind of heard more about it. The Liberal government got reelected, and so for now the project will continue forward. I want high-speed rail in Canada, but the way we're doing it feels so backwards. It doesn't feel like it's being thoughtfully planned. We're parceling it up and handing it to a P3 consortium to think about. But I don't even think they're going to have full control. So it's going to be this weird mix of a bureaucratic kind of problems, but also the P3 and its potential problems. If Canada wants high-speed rail, I think the way to go about it is to say, let's determine a route that people find amenable, and let's start protecting that route now. Let's start, buying up land. Let's start not allowing stuff to be built where we want to put high-speed tracks. Let's start determining what the speeds are going to be, doing all these things, because I don't think it's realistic to do this as one mega single project. It's going to come together over time, and so, but what you don't have to do is you don't have to plan it all over time. You can start to set aside useful things now. You can start to, get the pieces in order so that you can build the thing. And it doesn't feel like our approach is doing that. I also think, I was reading a novel that's set in France. And so last night in the shower, I was thinking, oh yeah, France has 5 high-speed rail routes that kind of shoot out like a star, right? There's north, west, east, southwest, southeast. Very nice. And then it came to me, and I was like, it is insane that our high-speed rail plan for Toronto and the rest of the Quebec City Windsor corridor goes one way from Toronto. If it is the whole political, we need to connect Quebec City, whatever. I think we should connect Quebec City. I don't think it should be equal priority as Montreal Toronto or Montreal Ottawa, Toronto Ottawa, because those are just higher value because bigger populations, existing rail transit systems, etc. But it's really crazy not to have the line continue west of Toronto. You've got Pearson Airport, you've got Hamilton, you've got all of southwestern Ontario, Niagara Falls. These are all major destinations, and it doesn't seem like the plan is to serve them. And you can do future phases, etc. But this is, again, why the way we're doing it is bad. It's going to be this kind of, it seems like it's going to be an islanded system that's not going to be very well integrated with the existing, regional rail system we're building in Toronto with GO Transit. Whereas ideally, it would be tightly integrated. And so, even if it's only at GO train speeds, high-speed trains should continue express west of Toronto to places like Pearson, where we should build a better train station, and also to Hamilton. But because of the way we're planning this, we're not going to get there. Someone's saying, didn't Carney promise HSR to Windsor as part of his campaign? Maybe he did, but the issue is politicians promise things and then they give us they give us projects that aren't the things they promise. If you want a high-speed rail system that serves a lot of places, doing it as a P3, which is going to make it more expensive, is not going to make it serve more places. And so it's all very frustrating to me. I also think that the reality about doing a high-speed rail system, and I would love to hear what people think in the chat, is that you shouldn't just build a high-speed rail system. You really should be thinking about building a modern rail system. This applies especially in Canada because I think even though it seems like it might happen in Montreal, it seems mostly unrealistic that we're going to build new tracks or new tunnels or things that go into the city centers, even though there's not always a lot of room to get tracks into and out of our major stations. And I don't think we're going to take the Japan approach of building entirely new stations that are, kind of in random locations in the cities, just because we don't have the wherewithal to build good transit to those locations / the ability to develop rationally around them. So it feels like the trains are going to have to go to places like Union Station and Central Station in Montreal, which means that we can't just be thinking about this as high-speed rail by itself. We also have to think about how we're modernizing the regional rail systems, or at least making them compatible to the same standards in Toronto and Montreal. But we have this terrible provincialism where, both literally and figuratively, where projects are all thought of so independently. There's not a grand strategy. We don't have like a Transport Canada probably knows less about trains than half of the people in this chat, at least about modern trains that don't run on fossil fuel. And so the problem here is that it's very hard to create a rational system, because you should be able to run trains on the GO tracks to Pearson and to Hamilton, even if they're not fully high speed. And you should be able to run, mixtures of service on different infrastructure while you're building the system. But because of the way we're going to build it, it's going to be very difficult. I would love to be proven wrong, but so far, I'm not super optimistic. They're doing really silly stuff. They're talking about things like the line will have 7 stations. It can't have more stations. It can't have less stations. And they have to be in these places. And it's just, that a rational process for planning and building this line does not look like that. Why is there Laval in Montreal, but there's no suburban Toronto station, even though, as I've talked about in blog posts, etc., having a suburban station for high-speed rail or having another station in major cities for high-speed rail makes a ton of sense, because if you're coming from the eastern part of Toronto, high-speed rail might suddenly not look competitive, because if you have to travel west to get to the city center, well, now suddenly you're extending the travel time for high-speed rail, whereas if you could just go to a nearby station that's east of the city, where the tracks will already run and where the cost of the station would be pretty minimal, that can make it a lot more convenient, and you do not need to have every train stop at every station. But it just feels like we have these people who are planning this line, and they have blinders on. They believe certain things are fixed that aren't fixed. They believe that certain things are flexible that probably shouldn't be flexible. Like, again, we should be talking about compatibility with Go, etc. All of it is very, opaque, non-transparent. These are problems I have in Toronto, but it's just this at like a national level. And it's just not the way that good infrastructure and a good system is going to be built. We're walking right into it. And unfortunately, the previous government, no government in Canada seems to be, good on this issue, smart on this issue in a way that's going to resolve this problem. And so I'm cynical about our ability to do high-speed rail. I was watching a video last night about the Sunrise Express in Japan, the sleeper train from Tokyo to to the west of Japan. And I was thinking, maybe the best we can hope for is just like a good Via Rail sleeper from Toronto to Montreal, because high-speed rail that doesn't suck it feels way out of reach. And I'm worried that I've said this in previous videos, but I'm worried we're going to build a high-speed rail system with just ridiculous flaws that make it feel like we built something we should have built, but we built it wrong, and now it's going to be decades before we can fix it. So that's the second topic. Someone's saying Laval has 430,000 people, and Scarborough has I presume like 700,000 plus people. Markham has 300,000, so there's probably like twice as many people in the eastern part of suburban Toronto than there is in Laval. So that justification is just silly. And if you're making a justification like that, I feel like you should know what the other places look like. I don't know if that's the point that's trying to be made, but that's just the kind of comment I see frequently. Looking. I'm gonna read through. So I guess how I'm gonna approach these streams is to try to talk about the topics and then read through a bunch of comments that people have given, which maybe it's not perfect, but this seems like a decent way of doing things. I'm just gonna go like this. Let me go here, and then I'm going to, once I'm done doing that, I'm going to 2 more topics today. I hope all 145 of you that are watching this stick around for this. But I'm going to talk about the urban rail in Africa, and then talk about how I've been feeling, because maybe that's interesting to people. Not good is how I've been feeling. So let's quickly go through this. CDLTO says a friend who worked for U.S. transit system said that the ADA requires a minimum of 51% of entrances being accessible, so that they closed a lot of secondary entrances to ensure they met the 51%. And that's the kind of thing that happens in the US. It probably does happen in Canada a bit as well, but it definitely happens in the US that people don't pay enough attention to. There's a lot of talk of like, we need public transit, trams are good, trolley bus is good, and then people aren't talking about the like political or regulatory issues like this that have catastrophic consequences but just aren't sexy to talk about. I feel like HSR should have went through Kingston. I think we should have at least seriously considered it, which we didn't. We didn't seriously consider it. Will you do the Bucharest Metro ever? Probably not. Sorry to say. But it's possible, but it is unlikely. A lot of things are also possible. 15-minute city movement in the U.S. I think it's broader than the U.S. I heard it was to please Quebec and to be equal Ontario and Quebec. This is just not that's not good planning. And Ontario and Quebec aren't equal. Ontario is much larger than Quebec. And Ontario, even though Quebec talks about being, pro-public transit, etc., and Quebec legitimately has a lot of good urban policy that is better than Ontario, I think it's pretty fair to say that Ontario has better transit than Quebec does. I was thinking about it recently, and Ontario is going to have like 5 light rail systems before Quebec builds a single one, right? We have in Mississauga and Brampton, Hamilton, Waterloo, Ottawa, Hamilton, 4 or 5 different light rail systems. Obviously, Toronto has a bunch of lines, so there's your 5th one before Quebec builds a single line. And they're not as big as Ontario, but they have, 9 million people? They definitely should have been able to build a tram by now. It's a bit ridiculous, and it feels like, okay, maybe focus on that instead of, we need to get as many stations as you do on a high-speed rail line. If it were up to me, I would get Talgo trains. Talgo trains are bad, so I think that's a bad idea. Why did it have to be a public-private partnership? Well, because that's kind of the liberals and conservatives have kind of made that their thing, and the NDP are unelectable. So it's just there was no serious doubt, I think, unfortunately. And the liberals are often captured by pretty bad ideas like this. CDL2O says, I wonder if the Quebec City requirement is what will end up making it non-financially feasible. That seems possible. Someone was mentioning that having to have some sort of way of getting around Montreal, like a potential tunnel, etc., are really expensive. That's a very good point. I think just every day that goes by, I think Paige Saunders' suggestion, as someone who's not even a train guy, that we should just start with a good line between Ottawa and Montreal is just so cogent. It just makes so much sense. You build a fast line between Ottawa and Montreal, you learn, and then you build west of Ottawa. And then you can talk about going east of Montreal later. But you should be trying to maximize ridership. And this is the same kind of issue of the wrong priorities, right? Putting the same amount of rail in Ontario or Quebec or trying to make it a similar amount of rail is a terrible priority. Having high ridership is a good priority because one of them leads to growth and it leads to rail to all kinds of places. The other one leads to the terrible project we have now. Okay. SNCF, says CTLTO, if you want high-speed rail, you should start by building a line directly between your two largest cities, Canada, California, and others. Nah. Yeah, the California high-speed rail thing, it's ridiculous. They should have listened to SNCF. It is always funny to me when people go, oh, SNCF, whatever, they left. They wanted to do something that wasn't allowed. Laws can be changed. Regulations can be changed. Projects can be changed. People, it's so frustrating to me. People were presented with these options. Change the law and change the promise of high-speed rail, but actually quite possibly get high-speed rail. Or don't do that and have a lot of nice videos of guideways with no tracks on them in the Central Valley, but no high-speed rail. Right now, there's no plan to finish the system. It's so frustrating to me that people. It is perfect, and there's the good, and people are saying, perfect. I need to follow perfect, and I think the idea that high-speed rail, again, the idea that I don't know what to call this form of politics. Besides, I guess it's basically like there's an analogy to cakes being sliced up, and one form of politics is like trying to get a bigger slice of the cake, and the other type of politics is trying to grow the cake. And I think that it's 100, like there's always going to be cases where one, slicing differently makes sense versus getting a bigger cake. But in transportation systems, something I feel like I have a pretty good idea about, I feel like growing the cake is the better solution. If California had have built high-speed rail between LA and San Fran, okay, I think we all think it would be very successful. I think there's a very strong case to be made that it would be very successful. And once you have a very successful high-speed rail line, it's so much easier to make the political argument to build branches or to build a second line that runs east of the initial line. The initial line becomes an express bypass of the Central Valley, and then the second line goes up to Sacramento, has a connection over to the Bay Area, etc. And that's something you could practically do because hopefully you'd be better at building. It shouldn't be a hard environment to build in, even though California has found a way of making flatlands in a pretty great climate a hard place to build. But the politics of it are just crazy. And so when I hear people defend California high-speed rail, having seen transit projects all around the world and what leads to success and what doesn't lead to success, it's just so frustrating because it's clear to me that transit works when it actually gets built, when people actually can use it. And the idea of a great transit project that doesn't actually get built is not a great idea. Sorry, I get fired up about this issue. Worth noting that America is much bigger and less dense. In Europe, you won't find many places where you drive in one direction and see virtually nothing for 5 hours. Not sure what that's... Oh. Okay, that comment doesn't make a lot of sense. It's definitely harder to do high-speed rail in North America. People who claim that it's the same as Europe or whatever, it's not, because we don't have a legacy rail system that we can build on top of, which in most cases in Europe has been a key part of getting high-speed rail built. Japan and China, different story. But people who pretend that North America should be just as good at high-speed rail as Europe are being silly because the context is totally different. We don't have electrified railways. We don't have modern railways. So you're not just asking to build a high-speed rail project, you're asking to do a lot of those other things at the same time, which is just harder. Intermediate density between destinations is basically as relevant to high-speed rail as it is to airlines. I wish we could start building capacity as a start. Otherwise, even if Alto succeeds, we'll lose all the expertise along with the special purpose delivery vehicle. Yeah, that's true. I also think we should be building ridership. Like, we should be trying to get VIA to be better. There's no reason to not pursue, because Alto feels, sadly, kind of 50% likely to fail, as much as it makes me sad. And I don't put that all on Alto. A lot of it's just the politics of it. But we should really not abandon trying to have Via Rail be better, which in some ways is much more achievable. Via Rail used to operate trains that took 4 hours to go from Toronto to Montreal. If we just had that again, and it could happen consistently, that would be a pretty good thing. And so I think we should be, while we're pursuing high-speed rail, we should also be trying to move in that direction. Where possible on the existing corridor, there are many places where you could have parallel tracks for Via, where you could try to remove level crossings. You could just enhance the infrastructure. We should be doing those things. Stations have level boarding, improve accessibility, high platforms. All of those things should still happen because the existing Via corridor route is still very useful. There's a lot of communities it goes through, etc. And we should want to build ridership because a lot of that ridership is still going to transfer over to high-speed rail. So I think that in some ways, Alto could end up being a net negative in that if it doesn't deliver high-speed rail, it takes people's focus off of Via, which, there's so many things that Via could do better today, like not acting like an airline. But people aren't going to think about that because they're going to be talking about Alto. Okay, I'm quickly going to go through the rest of these things, and then I actually talk about the main topic of this stream, which is urban rail in Africa. Okay. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of messages, so I'm gonna have to skip over a lot of these. Oh my god, there's a lot of messages. Okay. HS2 is a disaster. The UK is not great at planning modern railways. Feels fair to say. HS2 to HS1 link is cool and handy. I mean, yeah, would it be expensive? But it shouldn't cost a lot of money because, but the UK has cost problems. So, is bad HSR worse than no HSR? Possibly. Yeah, I think that's what I just said with regard to Via Rail. Ruby basically just said what I said. Wish there was more focus on conventional rail. We really, as advocates, should be pushing for both at the same time. What's wrong with Talgo trains? They're just not very good. They don't have a history of being very good. Yeah, the Talgo rail for Renfe has had tons of problems. Thing that bothers me about HSR compared to HFR is just how long it's going to take. Like, I get it, HSR makes sense. I think it's unfair to compare it to HFR because I think that was a terrible plan as well. I think the biggest plan with HFR is even presenting it as a single project. I guess that might be good for branding, but really what it should be is opportunistic upgrades where you can do them cost effectively, not this grand plan type of thing. There should be more downtown areas rather than just central London. Okay, a lot of this stuff is unrelated, but I'm just quickly scrolling through to see if there's anything I want to touch on. I'm not even going to talk about American high-speed rail because, yeah, I feel like that's a pretty low priority for Americans. Reese, we have to start from somewhere. At one point, we were in the same spot as the Americans in Europe. I'm not sure what that's meant to mean. Toronto, Montreal in 4 hours? What do you think this is? 2010? Oh, painful stuff. Painful. Okay. So I've gone to the bottom of the chat. Time to talk urban rail in Africa, which is the main topic of this stream. I'm not going to talk about this for an extremely long period of time. I just want to kind of highlight to people what urban rail exists in Africa because I didn't talk about it on my YouTube channel. I feel like I should have a video of me talking about it on the YouTube channel, even if it's in the form of a live stream. And I actually wrote a blog post on this, but I understand that that's not as engaging and a lot of people don't look at that stuff. So I want to kind of go over it. And The point of me covering urban rail in Africa is just to set the stage, tell you where things are, because it's not great in, broadly speaking. And I think that's kind of where you have to start. Africa, for obvious reasons, does not have the most amazing urban rail systems. It does have some urban rail systems, probably more than I think people think, but they have a lot of problems. And I think talking about those problems is important because some of the systems are actually pretty new. And the idea that I see someone sent a super chat. Thank you for that. I'm going to address it, but I'm going to finish this topic first, and then I'll talk about that. I think the thing to do with urban rail Africa is talk about it and talk about especially the new systems that are being built that have problems, because there's often on social media just like videos or pictures of, oh, look at this incredible system that country X or country Y built for this nation in Africa, and often the systems have a lot of problems, and they shouldn't be getting any kudos for building something if it's not really good, I think, because otherwise it's kind of taking advantage of the nation and getting it into debt for something that isn't even a good thing. It's a car loan, which is not good. So I'm going to do what I did in my blog post. I'm literally looking at my blog post for a high-level overview here, but start in West Africa and work my way counterclockwise around. The first place to look is Nigeria, which has two quote-unquote urban rail systems. They're both dicey. There's the Lagos system, or Lagos. I forget how to pronounce it. I think it's Lagos, which is the largest city in Nigeria. It's a massive city, so it definitely does justify like a metro system or something. And the Lagos system is a metro, effectively, at least the Western line, which I believe is called the Blue Line, is that, but it's just kind of rough. The entire Western Line basically is down the median of a giant roadway. It's not really an expressway, it's just a sort of giant, it has like collector roads, etc. It's not great. It goes into central Lagos, but it has the station, the sort of rail runs along the edge of the central area elevated, and so you kind of get the sense it probably misses a lot of important places. It's not clear how it will extend to the east. It probably should be underground in a tunnel, but obviously that would be expensive, and so it becomes hard. This is a kind of trend you'll see. There's also the Red Line, which I believe is meant to interline eventually and run into the city center, or at least run into the Blue Line and connect. And it's also dicey. It runs along existing tracks. I believe there's grade separation work happening, but as someone mentioned earlier in the chat, it's using like old rolling stock from other cities, which you just shouldn't have to. If you're building a system like this, it should have proper metro rolling stock, etc. Someone is mentioning the Red Line uses British HSTs and US Talgos from Wisconsin. It's just not appropriate. These are not rolling stock designed for urban rail service, right? And so it's a train, and it's not much more, and a city like Lagos deserves a good metro system. And hopefully one will be built at some point, but I'm not sure how much use the existing system will be. The Blue Line uses Chinese metro trains. I think it might be, I don't know if it's electrified at the moment. It's not great. It kind of naturally rolls you into the Abuja Light Rail, which is the other system in Nigeria. It's a great example of the term light rail being used for crazy things, because it is metro trains pulled by a diesel locomotive. There is extremely low frequencies. I believe it's the number of trains that are operated on this line. It's hourly, possibly. There's I think less than 10 stations. It's kind of just a railway in the most conventional sense that you would imagine Britain having in like 1880, but with modern Chinese trains. It's just not good. It's sad to see, because when you see it, like with the system in Lagos, you go, they spent money on this, probably a substantial amount of money on this, and it's not good, and it probably will never be good, and so it was just wasted, and it's really kind of upsetting to see. So those are the systems in Nigeria. I think they are doing some intercity rail stuff, which I believe is better than the urban rail stuff, but it's still, it's in cases like this where you're like, maybe BRT is better, because BRT, you can sort of imagine how it would be a bit more flexible, and it might not lead to this kind of outcome, because, how could it lead to this outcome? So continuing, you get to South Africa. South Africa is kind of interesting / weird because there are 4 different systems in South Africa that are sort of like suburban regional rail called Metro Rail. These systems are interesting. They operate on Cape Gauge, which is called Cape Gauge for a reason. It's narrow gauge, like in Japan. And honestly, if you look at the new Alstom trains that they operate, they look really good in my opinion. But there are a lot of problems with these systems. So when you look at them, and I guess for some reason before I did this project of kind of like going through all the urban rail in Africa, I was less familiar with them. Yeah, someone's saying Wikipedia says Abuja light rail is 4 services per day. Right? So what is that doing for anyone, right? Besides for the people who developed the project who get to say we built a train. But back to the Metro Rail in South Africa, these systems are so fascinating to look at. And yes, I am referring to the Extrapolis Mega, which, again, I think looks really cool, especially in along Consist. These systems are so strange because when you look at them, they have weird infrastructure. It's electrified. I believe it's basically 100% electrified, the Metro Rail systems. In fact, South Africa has national rail electrification. I think Lagos is a lot bigger than 6 million people. I think in the metro area, it's a lot more than that. I think that's probably some arbitrary line that's being drawn. The trains are narrow on the Metro Rail systems, but that's just, that's hard to change the loading gauge and the rail gauge. The national rail system in South Africa is electrified, but from videos I've seen, the electrification is pretty spotty and unreliable, which is kind of not what you want. At that point, yeah, diesel makes a lot of sense because it's better to not have electrification if it's unreliable because you want your trains to be able to move, right? So it's not great. So anyways, looking at the urban systems is very interesting. You see a lot of disparities, right? There are clearly lines that run through areas that are more prosperous. There's obviously going to be a racial element to that, which is really sad and hard to talk about. And those lines, you can see them having being the beginnings of something like the systems in Australia. There was a line in Cape Town I was looking at. I'm like, if you squint, this kind of looks like some of the lines in Brisbane. But then you go to other parts of the city, and the stations are not maintained to the same standard. They look like those stations in Lagos, but after 50 years of no one taking care of them. They might be kind of big, but they're connected to the streets with a dirt path. There's not a lot of development around them. There doesn't appear to be any kind of local transit connections with buses, etc. There's often more a bunch of platforms, but some are clearly abandoned. There are tracks that aren't going anywhere, that are disconnected. And it's interesting because there's clearly still a lot of people who are forced to use the system, right? And you see that the infrastructure was at times probably better. There's flyovers and stuff. It's just kind of sad because it's a system where you're I could see that there could be potential here, but it just has not been capitalized on. And that's basically what you see to varying extents across all of these systems. I recommend going and looking at the blog post. I think some of the images will make it a bit more obvious what I'm talking about. But then you have what's really bad, which is the Gautrain station. I think that's a Gautrain system in Gauteng province in South Africa, which is where Johannesburg and Pretoria are, the largest cities in South Africa. And this system is just really upsetting. So it is a nice system. And you look at it first, you're like, wow, this is really impressive. It uses basically British electric multiple unit trains, standard gauge, pretty high speeds. Big sections are underground. The stations look really nice. And then when you look at it, you realize that it's basically a train for wealthy people. It's mostly not connected to the existing system. There's a lot of okay, I should pause this to say, someone is mentioning in the chat, a lot of the overhead wires were stolen during COVID for some of the Metro Rail systems, which I heard some South African people reached out to me and said oh my God, this is crazy. And yeah, that's really bad. And that's all I can really say about that. Anyways, back to the Gautrain. The system is mostly disconnected from the existing rail system to probably disincentivize the people using the existing rail system from connecting to it. It basically parallels the existing rail system, so it's like, oh, you could have spent that money making the existing system better, but instead you created a train for rich people that is legitimately very nice. I mean, it's nicer than any train system in Canada. And it was built around the World Cup. So you can kind of see it's like, okay, we want to send an image of wealth, etc. It connects to some areas that are pretty dense and pretty nice looking. And then you look into the demographics and you're like, it's like a racially segregated train system. It's really screwed up. It's depressing. And even putting all that stuff aside, it's just clear that the best path forward was to upgrade the existing system and make it good, not to build a parallel train system for a small number of people who could afford to use it. So very, very sad, basically. It looks like it has good bus connections, etc., but it's really, you're like, it's a nice thing, but the foundation is terrible, and it's very upsetting how this got built. Now, in the blog post, I actually talk about this, but I'm not going to really talk about it here. You should go look at the blog post. It's on my old blog, just reesemartin.ca. It's one of the top posts on there. Basically, I mention that there are a few modern railways being built in East Africa. They're not urban railways. They're not even really suburban or commuter railways. They're just called like SGRs, or standard gauge railways. A lot of African nations had railways built during colonialism for resource extraction. They weren't very well built. They tended to be narrow gauge. They are often in disrepair, and because they were like extremely oriented towards resource extraction and other things that I'm not going to get into, they are not useful for modern purposes. And again, the infrastructure was not well built. It's not in good condition. It's narrow gauge. And so there are a number of projects in Kenya and in Tanzania and in Ethiopia to build modern standard gauge railways. 2 of those systems are electrified, making them more modern than most railways in North America, which is pretty impressive. And they're built by like an American-European consortium and a Chinese consortium. They have problems as well, but they do seem more promising than a lot of the urban rail projects you see in Africa. So that's I guess a more positive thing. Also, it is kind of hilarious if you look at the Nairobi station on the Kenya standard gauge railway. It looks extremely like a Chinese railway station. It was built by Chinese companies, etc. So that's not surprising. It's just a bit funny to look at. Speaking of the Ethiopia to Djibouti standard gauge railway, which is electrified, as I mentioned, Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, actually has a Chinese-built light rail system, and it's not great. Someone was talking to me about this, and they're like, "Oh, it goes kind of to the right places, and elements of it are good." Yeah, no, I mean, I think I could get behind it as a good system if it was fully grade separated. If it was fully grade separated and it was reliable and it was built to the capacity it needed. It is none of those things. It uses these tiny trams. It's kind of like an Eglinton Crosstown, but the Eglinton Crosstown is a marginal line for Toronto at the edge of the city that's at least mostly underground and uses bigger trains than the Addis Ababa Light Rail. The Addis Ababa Light Rail uses smaller trains than the Eglinton Crosstown. The infrastructure does not look very good. The ridership seems to be way higher than what can actually be supported. I've heard there's a lot of reliability issues with the trains and the infrastructure. It's better than the systems in Nigeria in that it at least seems like a coherent system, but it is not great. It's quite rough. Someone's mentioning that the African railways use ETCS. Yeah, so better railway signaling than anything in America or Canada. But not in Mexico, because Mexico has ETCS on a few lines. Now, the dramatic thing that you notice with urban rail in Africa is when you go to North Africa, it's completely different, and there's actually a lot of urban rail. So I'm going to kind of speed run this before I look at all the messages in the chat, because I think people have a lot of interesting comments, and then I'm going to wrap on that final topic I was mentioning about. So the first thing is the Cairo Metro. The Cairo Metro is a proper metro system, and it is... I talked about Sao Paulo being the most densely used, to which people were like, Cairo. Yes, Cairo is more densely used. It has over 2 million daily riders with just 84 stations. There's a triangle transfer. It's extremely heavily used. It is like a proper metro system. But as I was talking to, as people in a group chat I'm in were talking about today, because I am in a transit group chat, as I think I mentioned in the last stream as well, a lot of the Cairo system was built kind of using old conventional railways, which does give Athens Line 1 vibes. So I think that's interesting. It's also like, okay, that's why it was maybe a little less, maybe that's why Cairo, which is not super wealthy, at least in the modern day, was able to put this system together that's actually pretty compelling. Line 1 is interesting because it uses the same trains as the RERB in Paris. There's a lot of French connections in North Africa, which you can read about online. That's a topic I don't have the time or latitude to get into today. The system's actually growing. They're talking about a new Line 4 and a bunch of other lines that are kind of in planning. They're building a kind of monorail subsystem in New Cairo, which is kind of like an area east of the city where they're doing a lot of like modern development, master plan stuff. You can, yeah, it's a monorail. It's not great, but it kind of gives me a DLR vibe. They also built a metro system to the new administrative capital, which is definitely problematic. Read about it online. Look at like Vox videos about the new administrative capital of Cairo. It's not great, but the train line is hilarious because it's like a Chinese regional rail line. Quite modern looking, nice trains, electrified and everything, but of course they had to call it light rail. So that's interesting. Cairo and Alexandria both did have trams, but in the same way that I think like not Mumbai, Kolkata has trams. Basically, they're really dilapidated trams, not really a good modern system. Algeria is really interesting because Algeria is crazy transit. Okay, Algiers has a metro that looks very nice and a tram system. It's the capital city of Algeria, about 3 million people. Nice metro, trams. It actually has a quote unquote RER system with like old style Stadler flirts. So it actually looks very, very good. And what was remarkable, I think this had changed since the last time I had looked at rail in Africa when I wrote this blog post. There are 7 cities in Algeria with modern tram lines, all built by French consortia, with Alstom trams, etc. I can't even honestly pronounce a lot of the names of these cities. Like there's Constantine and Oran and some others, but really impressive stuff. These are like this is what I'm talking about. Quebec should have nice trams like Algeria does. They look really good. They're kind of just modern French trams like you'd see in Sydney or in various French provincial cities. So that's very interesting actually. There's like a ton of these systems. Morocco is kind of similar to Algeria because it also has a bunch of French trams, but they're concentrated in 2 cities, which have multiple lines each, whereas in Algeria, they're mostly like, we put a tram here, 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 but they're not big systems. They're like one 13-stop line per city type of thing. Whereas in Morocco, Casablanca and Rabat both have multiple lines. Casablanca actually has 4, so you're starting to go like, oh, this is giving me some Lyon vibes. Like Casablanca probably should build a metro, but it's nice, and you can imagine they're probably going to build a couple more lines in the future, and they could build a metro, and the wayfinding and stuff looks really nice. So you start to see that, like, there are good examples in Africa, like that you could send planners to from other parts of Africa to look at. Like Casablanca seems like probably a pretty good model for a lot of medium-sized African cities as to like what they should aspire to. And the thing that's nice is that, like, honestly, the trams in Casablanca and in the cities in Algeria, they're nicer than essentially any North American light rail. Like the trams are nicer, the infrastructure looks better. So yeah, it's really, they're high quality systems. Yeah, it's very impressive. And yeah, again, the wayfinding, like go look up the Casablanca tramway map. It's beautiful. It's nicer than basically any wayfinding I've seen in Canada. Probably French influenced, but it's awesome stuff. And of course, Morocco also has high-speed rail, not urban rail, but unlike California. I believe there's also some lines in Tunisia, but for some reason I didn't do research on that. Maybe someone can mention in the chat. I think it's just in Tunis that there's maybe a line or 2. But yeah, there is also some like a decently modern rail system in Morocco, run by ONCF, which includes a nice link to the Casablanca airport. That kind of surprised me when I looked at it. I was like, oh wow, this infrastructure is again better than anything in North America. So that's good for them, because North America has bad infrastructure, but it's not that bad. So some of these cities are actually doing a pretty good job. And then the last system I thought of was the Dakar TER. And so you can see that all the places that France has pumped money into, they've also pumped planning into, and as a result, they have nice systems, but they're also quite well planned. Whereas if you look at some of the systems that had, like money from China, the planning seems less great, and the rolling stock also seems less great. Whereas if you look at like the Dakar TER, the trains look like trains you would see in France. Like they are indistinguishable from just French trains. They're just like nice Alstom trains. The stations look attractive. So you kind of feel like this feels like a better deal. They're probably paying a bit more, but the infrastructure seems to be much higher quality. The TER in Dakar is electrified. It's kind of, it's just a TER regional railway. I believe the trains are bi-mode. I remember looking at news coverage when the line opened, and I think they said they're bi-mode for reliability. This is a problem in a lot of systems because the national power grids may not be super reliable, and so to provide sufficient reliability, sometimes they have like a local power station or dual mode trains. And these are actually things that happened in like other parts of the world historically. So it's not actually that surprising. But these things can change as the systems become more reliable. So I'm going to quickly go and power through the chat, respond to super chats, which are much appreciated, and then wrap up with one last thing I wanted to talk about, which I think will be interesting to people. So William Arazo says, how would you modernize the Canadian rail system? I really appreciate this question. I'm going to address it once I've gone through all this stuff relevant to urban rail in Africa. Someone says it's either Chinese or French, depending on the country. Yep, that's pretty much accurate. Lagos Blue Line is a Chinese metro. Yeah, okay. Yep, people reacting to the craziness of the Lagos metro. I've been to the Ankara metro. CRRC will build you the most Spartan metro cars in the world. If you ask them for that they will. Lots of companies would do that, to be honest, but it just seems like more people go to CRRC because they can offer the lowest price. The Lagos Blue Line is electric, but with only 20-minute service intervals and not enough stations, so it's not very useful. So, yes, kind of, I guess, what I was saying, more or less. Don't want to have electric rail in a country that does load shedding. Yeah, not great. Comes from the unreliability of the South African electrical grid in general. Okay, but these are cases where it's like, okay, South Africa should should invest in like natural gas plants for its rail network, because electrification is good, and honestly, running it on natural gas, or I guess if there's hydro projects that could be done, would still be better than running diesel trains. But you should invest in that. Put the plants directly next to transformer stations, and it is exclusively to have a reliable transportation network, because that's something that... Is my mouse dead? Ugh. I think my mouse is dead. Let's see if I can charge it while I'm doing this. Fortunately, it's not an Apple Magic Mouse, so I can charge it while I'm doing stuff on it. Yeah. CDLTO says, freight doesn't care if your narrow gauge train follows a winding route with a max speed of 40 kilometers per hour. Very true. Well, the kind of freight that is like coal and stuff like that doesn't, cars or kind of more processed goods, speed matters more. Going up here. Wow, people had quite a lot of comments. Aren't they the Addis Ababa light rail trams R3 section? Could have built a medium capacity metro instead. Yep. It's been on a death spiral because of lack of ridership, lack of funds, and lack of spare parts. Not great. Morocco could build an MRT in Rabat and Casablanca. Definitely, like a Copenhagen-style system would make so much sense. Because I think Lyon has kind of shown that you don't need big trains for a medium-sized city. Just run them really frequently. I think Copenhagen Metro, do it in the big Moroccan cities. It would make a lot of sense. Cairo Rail, having old Athens rail vibes 2,000 years after the Hellenic Empire, is hilarious. Yeah, I guess sort of. The suburban monorails in Cairo, not very good. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. Egypt, world leaders in unfinished master plan cities. I live in Algeria. The Algiers Metro is very reliable. It's short at the moment, 19 kilometers, but it's doubling in size. Yeah, like, it gives like Lyon vibes, which is good. It's solid. Extended to 95 kilometers in the long term with four metro lines total. I really hope they don't do the monorail thing someone is mentioning. Algeria is building a tramway system for each regional capital. This is kind of like a bad decision because just because you're a regional capital doesn't mean you should have a tramway. But you know, more trams not something I'm going to really complain about. Like it feels better to focus on a few good systems than to spread things so thin. You know, like I'm sure Algiers, it would be better if it just grew larger and they built more lines there. Casablanca should have went with Metro. It can still do that. Should probably do both. Morocco is apparently going to be doing more suburban rail, and they bought Hyundai EMUs, so that's pretty cool. People are talking about Tunis has 5 tramway lines, and there's a light rail line in a different region of the country, kind of like the coastal tram. Okay, no, that's interesting. J-Bon, thanks for the super chat. Sadly, Morocco made its royal train from Bud SPVs, which they refer to as seldom powered vehicles. Some other cities are planning on building metros like Kampala. You might be looking at the wrong Casablanca map if you're saying it's not good, but because the one I was looking at seemed pretty good. Someone saying the trains in Dakar are just the French regionalists. Yep, that's my point. Casablanca really should do a metro. Ontario Power Generation's reactor refurbishments as an example of a good large capital project. It seems more like an okay large capital project, not necessarily good. Okay, so I got to the bottom. So William Arazo asked, what do you think the ideal way of expanding the Canadian rail network would be? I'm kind of assuming you go in the non-Alto direction, so you don't build a high-speed rail line. It would just be basically do what Go Transit is doing nationwide, okay? So every big city should have 15-minute, minimum hourly regional rail trains to the outlying suburbs and cities, which Go shows you can do even when there's mixture with freight. So do that. Upgrade the stations like Go and Via have done in various places. Like, look at like a station like Agincourt on the Go network, and a station like, I think Belleville has one of the upgraded Via stations. Though I think in Canada, every station should have a canopy. A lot of our cities have terrible weather. Canopy is good for protection. Frequencies are bad, so you don't want to be left waiting in the rain. So I think upgrade stations like that. Build a lot more tracks so you have parallel passenger tracks. I don't necessarily think you need new passenger lines. You just need dedicated passenger tracks. Have two additional tracks built along freight lines, and then in places where the freight line crosses the passenger line, like there's a branch or something, and it's heavily used, you do a grade separation, you do like a flyover or something. It could be single track because most places in Canada are not going to justify super high frequencies. But basically start to build a parallel passenger network along the freight lines, following the same principles as Go, opportunistically. Upgrade the stations, upgrade to ETCS signaling across the country. It will not be cheap, but it would be valuable. Look at what some places like Norway have done. some other like places like Australia starting to use more modern signaling on freight rail. I think electrifying, honestly, just electrify the network, because what it would let you do is run EMUs in places once it's justified, run better trains, more powerful locomotives, etc. Be useful for freight in the mountains. Electrification is not going to be quick, but start in mountainous / areas with a lot of grades, urban areas. It's tricky because obviously we do not have, the freight companies don't want to be changing locomotives in the cities. I think the solution is to do some sort of hybrid locomotive system where you have, and they're already talking about doing this, but having like those Flix drive trains, which are basically like an additional locomotive that acts as batteries that enables regenerative braking on freight trains, which they don't have. When they brake, they turn the electricity, which they generate because they use electric motors, into heat, which just gets blown away in the air. So start by adding those battery locomotives to start saving power, essentially turning trains in Canada into hybrids at a minimum. I think that could be done actually really quickly, and it would have a huge positive environmental impact because every time you're braking or going downhill, you could be generating electricity. And then what you could do is you could extend that so that, like, okay, we're going to start electrifying urban areas. And you could have it so that you charge those batteries as you pass through the urban areas. So it's not going to be, like, it's not that you're going to be running across the country fully electric, but, you can imagine if every city over like 200,000 people has electrified rail in the middle of it, then you kind of, the train charges a bunch of times on a long journey. And even though it's not traveling, even probably it's maybe traveling 5% of its journey on electricity, and maybe you get a couple extra percent from regenerative braking, you're starting to reduce emissions. Canada's a huge country. It's not realistic to electrify everything immediately, but focusing on doing it strategically and focusing on doing it in cities where there is a real potential to operate some suburban or regional rail service, I think that would be a good idea, and it would make a lot of sense. I'm looking here to see if there's anything else. My child is laughing. Is it too ambitious to electrify 100% of Canadian rail lines? No, but it would take a very long time. And some lines probably you don't electrify because it just doesn't make sense. They're seldom used or very lightly used. ACS 64s are not freight locomotives, so you wouldn't be using those. Thanks for the super chat, J-Bon. Local changes didn't stop BC from electrifying the line to Tumbler Ridge. Case study for Canada electrifying freight rail. Yes, the Tumbler Ridge stuff in BC was electrified, but it was electrified for very specific reasons, so they could do steeper grades and stuff. There are similar mine railways in the US that are electrified, but these are like mine railways. They're not main lines, so I think it's not a great example. Oscar, thanks for the super chat. Can you do a video on Sydney's light rail? No, but I do have one on Nebula, so if you want to go subscribe to me on Nebula, you can go watch the one I did over there. I'm going to end the stream now. I did want to talk about how I've been feeling about transit in Canada and about transit in general and kind of growing cynicism, but I think I'm going to leave that for another day. Going to go hang out with my family because it's pretty late. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming out to the stream. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you subscribe to my blogs, which are linked in the description, and also save the link to the next live stream because I'll be doing another one in 2 weeks. Yeah, I can maybe talk about some of the other things people are talking about in the chat then. So, thanks everyone. I appreciate it. And yeah.